Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through a list of some fantasy series that I completed in 2024. Similar to some of the other recap style of videos I've done, so as an example, series I plan to continue, series I'm DNFing, in a similar fashion I am going to more so treat this as an overview. If you are interested in more in-depth thoughts for any of these, whether they be spoiler free or spoiler filled, I'll have videos I've done for them in the description bar down below. With all that said, jumping into it, I'm going to start with the two that one I haven't really been able to shut up about all year long, because not only did I start and complete this series this year, but it is absolutely a new all-time favorite. And then the other, turns out, is also a new favorite completed series that I have read. However, I feel it kind of went under the radar because I picked it up later in the year. We are kind of coming up on the Goodreads content and doing these more recap style of videos, so I don't think I've gotten it out there as much that I love it. I figured I'd start with a balance of, you've talked about this too much and I probably should talk about this series more. And those two series would be Age of Madness and the Daevabad Trilogy. Age of Madness is a continuation series, if you don't know. Most people would recommend, and I would as well, reading the First Law trilogy before you pick up Age of Madness. You don't technically have to, but there are going to be certain plot points and there's going to be certain reveals that I think are going to have much more of an impact if you are familiar with these characters. And I do also feel like there are certain characters that show up that you immediately, if you know from the original trilogy, you're just immediately filled with dread. But when you don't have that, then the experience is very different, and maybe some of the reveals are interesting, exciting, very unexpected. And then some of them, though, if you have read it, you're like, oh no, I don't like what's happening here. But regardless, it's a great series. That's the point. It's so good. It is grimdark, and if you're not a fan of grimdark, then this is probably not the series for you, but it is very bleak while also simultaneously being absolutely hilarious. It is not necessarily, in my opinion, leaning into being satire, as I feel it is more rooted in reality, but the thing is, reality sometimes can be so depressing and it can be so terrible and absurd that it almost feels like satire. And I just think that Abercrombie has a gift of sort of showcasing the way that human beings are, the way that progress actually mostly doesn't really affect anybody but those who are already among the most elite in their societies. He has a way of capturing all of those things and being super funny at the same time. And I really feel like Age of Madness, for me anyway, was an improvement on everything I already liked about First Law, just expanded on those things and made them even better. And I cannot wait for his next book. I am so excited. When I finished Age of Madness, I immediately wanted to go back and reread First Law and then just read through all of it again. And I was like, no, I have so many other things I have to read, but I do really look forward to more Abercrombie. But then getting into Daevabad, the first book for Daevabad for me was a reread, and I had a kind of goofy reason for DNFing the series. It was always one I hoped to come back to, and my reason for DNFing was that the second book, the break between the first and the second, there's a very climactic moment at the end of the first book. And I was really looking forward to, because at the time I picked it up, the second book hadn't even been out yet. So when the second book came out, I was like, I can't wait to find out what happened right after that event. And then there's a big time skip, and I was like, what? And for some reason, that just really threw me for a loop. And since then, though, I've had years to get over that. So I reread the first book and then flew through the series and absolutely loved it. Every time I picked up, which only happened twice because there's 3 books, so I was about to say every time I came back to the series, but I only came back to the series 2 times because I came to the second book and I came to the third. But the point is, every time it felt like coming home. I loved these characters. I loved the complexity of them. I loved the complexity of their world. I like that they're all flawed. They all feel very realistic, and there are no easy answers. I feel the world was really well done, and it's a story that I definitely think that rereading the entire trilogy, there are certain things that are going to be really fun to see how the author incorporated hints along the way. I loved it. I thought it was great. This is one where I haven't really had a chance to talk about, as I said, that much just yet. here on this channel. I did do for my patrons a very in-depth spoiler discussion for the first book, and then a spoiler discussion for the whole series I did do over on my side channel, World Hoppers. That's a channel where all the AdSense goes to charity. So if you are a fan of that series and you want to hear more spoiler-filled thoughts, they are available. Next up are a couple of duologies. So the first one would be House of the Dead. I thought that the first book was so much fun. The pacing in this duology is great. Everything's very explosive. The characters really just come to life and scream off the page. This was such a great adventure fantasy story with cool world building and fun characters. And if that's something that you're looking for, especially if you want a palette cleanser, but you don't necessarily want something that is super cutesy, or maybe you don't want something that's too low stakes, you still want to have something that leans more into high fantasy, you just don't necessarily want the really bleak or the really epic, this one might be a fun one to pick up. I know I quite enjoyed it, and I did like the expansion of the familial relationships, and I think what I called familial intrigue that you get in the second installment. From there, the next two are the ones that I would say have slight asterisks, one of which would be the Sworn Soldier series by T. Kingfisher, and the reason that I'm categorizing it in this way is that I don't know if there are going to be more in this series, so for now I guess you could say at the very least I'm caught up. If there are no additional stories, then I'm completed with this, but I did enjoy actually the second book more than the first. I might be the minority in that. I think a lot of people really like the first one more. The first one is a retelling of the fall of the House of Usher. The second one, you're looking at the character as they're basically trying to not only get through the trauma of the things that occurred in the first story, but they are also, we're really dissecting the PTSD that they have from war, while simultaneously having a present day conflict that is once again rooted in horror. And I did quite like that blend. I wouldn't say this is an all-time favorite, and it's also not my favorite T. Kingfisher by any means, but when I'm in the mood for something that definitely leans more into the scary than it does into fantasy, this is, I think, a good series for me to get into. And then also from there, we have Bookshops and Bone Dust. This one is a prequel to Legends and Lattes, which is why it doesn't quite feel right to call it a series or even a duology. But there's two books, and this is a prequel, but it's the second one. So I am calling it a part of a series. I did like Bookshops and Bone Dust. I wasn't sure when it first came out, and I also was hesitant with Legends and Lattes when it came out because it just had so much hype, Legends and Lattes specifically, and I really was worried that my expectations were going to be too high, but I ended up really enjoying the aesthetic of it all. I feel like it absolutely did cozy fantasy, but specifically sword and sorcery cozy fantasy exceptionally. And then with Bookshops and Bone Dust, I didn't know if we would be having it be too similar to the first one, but I really liked the different thematic elements that we got here while still having that sense of found family. It was quite cozy. I really enjoyed it, and this duology, if you want to call it that, has turned out to be one that I definitely think for me is deserving of the praise within cozy fantasy discussions. I just realized I actually have 3 additional duologies to talk about. So the next one would be, I don't know for sure what the name of the series is, but the second book in this duology is Dark Star Burning, Ash Falls White. And the first one was Song of Silver, Flame Like Night. I thought that the conclusion of this was very moving and sad, but I did think I liked the first book a little bit more. I felt that the themes maybe were a little stronger in the first book. This is one of those stories where I don't necessarily think that expanding it and making it into a trilogy, I don't know if that would have been the right route, and I also don't know that a standalone would have done it justice, but I do feel like the duology format maybe didn't perfectly capture everything I was hoping for in the story, as within the second book, you do dive into certain lore things a little bit more, and for me, I almost wish we had more time with those things, and I think it was just sort of a pacing across the duology that I wasn't 100% in love with. That said, I feel it sounds as though I'm being kind of negative on it. I still think this duology was a lot of fun. I thought that it was very vibrant and it felt full of life. I thought that the setting was captured really well, and I do feel that the themes were very powerful. I think that the themes are really heavy ones, but they're done in a way that I think was very fitting for a young adult story, and I think it's kind of a good introduction to works that are that are tapping into these themes, a lot of which have to do with how culture and history can sort of be lost when you have groups of people that are being conquered and their lives basically are being pushed down to an extreme, and they're either forced to assimilate or flee, and it's pretty much impossible for them to try and resist, but you are looking at characters who are attempting to do just that. And you also kind of dissect what is the line that characters don't want to have to cross in order to protect their people and everything that is being stolen from them, if there even is a line. So I thought that those were done quite well. I just think, as I said, that the pacing throughout the duology wasn't perfect for me, but I still very much liked it. Next up, we have Curse for True Love. I can never remember which one is which in this series. So Once Upon a Broken Heart is the first one, and then I get the next two mixed up, but I finished the trilogy is the point. And it is so nonsensical and ridiculous, and I've described it before as feeling like you take every fairy tale trope, you throw it into a pot, you stir it up, and then you knock the pot over, and then whatever comes out, that's the story. So it's very kind of absurd and over the top, which I think is fitting of a certain kind of fairy tale story where it just feels like one bizarre thing after the next is happening, and I didn't dislike that necessarily. I did feel like the third book, though, maybe in a way by having what I just described be the way the story unfolded in the first two books, it did mean that the third book wasn't the most satisfying because it still just kind of felt like random thing after random thing. And I actually feel like we took that and expanded on it really well in the second book, and then the third book kind of just finished the story, which was fine. But it wasn't my favorite in the trilogy. Still a fun, ridiculous story, though, that is, you know, you fly through it. So I did enjoy that element to it. That one obviously is a trilogy, not a duology. The next two that were duologies would be Divine Rivals and its sequel, Ruthless Vows. So I did complete that. And then Cage of Dreams, the first book being City of Nightmares. Wow, those two books are very unalike. So Divine Rivals is a story that really, to me, also might kind of have flown under the radar as a favorite because I read it so early in the year. I think I talked about it then and then kind of moved into other stuff. So it hardly feels like I even read it this year. But this is a duology that to me is very meaningful because of who it centers, which would be characters that aren't typically the heroes. Usually the heroes are those that fight back or are able to have positions of power, and they use their wit and their intelligence to try and save the day, we'll say, to put it simply. But these characters are the ones that, in a lot of ways, comparatively, we might see them as powerless, but ultimately they are doing everything they can to expose the world to the atrocities of war. And I think having characters that are basically journalists being the heroes of the story, not only was it amazing and moving to see within the story, but I feel it also has a lot of things about our own world tied into it that you can read into the story. And I kind of wish we had more works where those were the kinds of characters that were seen as heroic. On top of that, there is a love story in this that I am a fan of. I was nervous when I went into it because the characters sort of take their time to develop individually. And one of them, I was like, I don't really like this character. And then they definitely grew on me. But I feel the characterization individually was done well. I liked the characters together. I liked the themes. I do think that the plot is not the strongest part of the story, but it didn't really matter for me because I found the themes to be so moving. City of Nightmares and Cage of Dreams. This is about a world where people's nightmares can become real. And as a result, the world is kind of bizarre. And you have had advancements that prevent people from dreaming so that these things don't happen, but things slip through the cracks. And so you now have entire forces dedicated to dealing with nightmares, which that's what they categorize the beings and things that come into existence once somebody does start dreaming. Our main character is terrified of these things. She has extreme PTSD from them because her sister turned into a nightmare and then killed their father, and then she had to be gunned down, basically. So our main character is traumatized from this, which doesn't sound funny at all, and it's not, but the story is so weird, and she is funny. Like, how she processes things, and how she sort of, like, there's a scene, and it's very distinct where there's a moment where there's chaos going on and our character's just kind of like sitting behind a bar and I'm trying to remember what she's doing. I feel like she's cleaning something or taking notes on something. I don't remember, but she's just, their world is so bizarre and intense that it feels almost cartoonish. And the author really embraces that. It's not just that I'm morbidly taking something serious and finding it funny. I mean, the author leans into the weird factor a lot and then is very cheeky with it. And I was a fan. I enjoyed it. It's very weird and it's kind of niche, but I had a lot of fun with it. That's it for the ones that I have officially completed at the time that I'm recording this video, which is a decent amount in advance before the very end of the year. Because of that, there are additional stories that I expect very much to have completed before the end of 2024. I'm going to list those off really quick, so if you're interested in hearing more about them, you'll know that I'll likely be doing either reviews for the entire series or talking about the conclusion books themselves within various videos early 2025. A very obvious example of this would be Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. This is not out yet at the time I'm recording, so it would be impossible for me to have completed Storm My Archive, but I am going to be finishing Storm My Archive within 2024, as I'm sure many of you will be as well, and I expect that I'm not only going to be talking about Wind and Truth. I'm sure I'm probably going to talk about it. I'm probably going to talk to my friends about it. Then there are probably going to be conversations about what does this mean for the greater Cosmere and what are our predictions for the next era of Storm My Archive. I'm nervous. I'm so nervous because for so many of us, this is one of our favorite series of all time. So to have that last book in that first 5-book chunk almost here is terrifying. But anyway, I'm sure I'm going to have that done. That's the point. I'm sure I'm going to have that done before the end of the year. As for the rest of them, I'm just going to list them off really quick. Foul Days, the sequel would be Monstrous Nights. Foul Days came out in 2024, as did Monstrous Nights. They came out a few months apart, and Monstrous Days recently came out, so I plan to pick that up very soon. I really enjoyed the first book. It is just going to be a duology, and I'm excited because a lot of duologies, as even this list shows, tend to be young adult, so it's exciting to have an adult fantasy duology, and I had a blast with that first book, so I am excited for Monstrous Nights. Fireborn Blade, first book is basically novella length, as is the second, so I'm sure I'm going to be getting to that one very, very soon. I do know that the second book is not quite the same in its format as the first, is not only somewhat of a genre bender, it also, I would say, it has a very interesting way of telling you the story. And I don't know that the second book's going to follow in those same footsteps, but I'm excited nonetheless. Also, the Winter Night Trilogy, I finally continued with this series this year, and I really enjoyed that second book. I've heard the third book by a lot of people is their favorite, so I can't wait to see the conclusion of this trilogy. Tyranny of Faith, is that the name of the third one? No, that's the name of the second one. Justice of Kings is the first, Tyranny of Faith is the second, and I remember the series name. Is it Empire of the Wolf? I'm completely spacing. It doesn't matter, but that's embarrassing. I'll know soon enough because I'll read it. Anyway, this series. I read the second one this year, plan to complete the trilogy by reading the third one. I meant to read it months ago and just had some other things coming in from the library, and I had to kind of prioritize those because I knew that my holds weren't going to last very long. So that's why this one didn't get read sooner, but I am very excited to keep going with that. But that would be it for some series that I've completed this year. It was a goal of mine to get through more series, but I kind of accidentally, I would say, swapped out some of the ones that I initially was planning to complete and instead sort of either started and completed entirely books that weren't on that list, or maybe I continued with some, swapped a couple things out here and there. Maybe I didn't complete a series, but I continued on and then I completed a different series. Whatever the case may be, I'm not disappointed in the amount of series I completed. I feel I accomplished the goal, even if it wasn't the exact specifics that were complete. At least I pushed forward with that, and I am very happy because I have really enjoyed so many of these. Let me know if it was a goal of yours, and if it was, how did you do? Did you get through a lot of series? What series have you completed this year that really surprised you, that you really, really loved? If you are interested in hearing more about any of these, I'll have reviews in the description bar down below, as well as links to the books themselves. Thanks so much for watching, though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.